Hi everyone, this is Chapter 9, Career Counseling for Multicultural Groups. So this chapter is going to be a little bit longer than the other ones because we're going to break down all the different cultures and then discuss it. So I'll just keep it brief right now and then we'll go through it and then you'll see what I'm talking about. All right, by the middle of the 21st century, the US will no longer be predominantly a Caucasian society. With help with overcoming barriers of prejudice, socioeconomic status, language differences, cultural isolation, and culture-related differences are areas that we need to prepare ourselves for because it's no longer going to be a Caucasian dominant or westernized dominant society anymore. That means that we need to put all the other cultures into perspective as well. Counselors need to become culturally aware, evaluate their personal views, and understand that other people's perspectives may be as legitimate as their own. Okay, so that means that if you're Caucasian, your beliefs you believe are right, but you also need to respect the fact that an Asian's perspective or a Black person or African American person's perspective or Latinx or Native American are also equally as valid as their own. What is culture? So Matsumoto and Zhuang in 2013 says that culture is a dynamic system of rules, explicit and implicit, established by groups in order to ensure their survival, involving attitudes, values, beliefs, norms, and behaviors shared by a group, but harbored differently by each specific unit within that group. Communicated across generations, relatively stable, but potential to change across time. So that's a lot of things to take in when it comes to culture, right? So there's a lot of things that each culture believes in, but you also have to make sure that within those groups that you need to know that not everyone is going to agree with everything in the same way as well. What that's basically saying is that not no each minority group is homogenous, which is all the same. Like you cannot say that all African American people love church, right? Although church might play a significant role for a majority of people who are Black or African American, you can't just say that everyone is. Okay? Same with all the other cultures as well. And that grandparents have a different style compared to um, uh, the parents compared to the grandchildren. Okay? Because society changes as well. No one should assume that any ethnic group is homogeneous. Example, Mexico has 56 ethnic groups that identify within their own culture and have their own languages. So within only in Mexico, one country, there's already all this diversity in it as well. Okay. Culture is a learned behavior. Two people from the same race may share some values, attitudes, and so on, but some might also have very different cultural makeups. How much has been acculturated from racial heritage to socialization varies even within the dominant culture group of a country. So again, it's just like disabilities. Two people with diabetes, let's say, will have very specific needs. Okay, so again, with ethnicity and race, the same thing is going to happen there. Cultural variabilities and worldviews. General term, worldview refers to the person's perceptions and understandings of the world. That includes perceptions of basic human nature, roles of family members, relationships with each other, locus of control, like who is to blame. Sometimes some cultures believe it's destiny, right? Something that God has decided. And then some other people believe that you make your own luck or your own destiny. Okay. Orientation of time, which basically means how do people perceive time. Work values, and then, of course, activities. Individual cultures, so individualistic cultures, tend to be the ones that are described as people from North America and Europe. Great amount of value is placed on the individual accomplishment. The individual strives for self-actualization, revered for their autonomy and their independence, and empowered to achieve and become individually responsible. So basically what that is saying is that people in individualistic cultures really rely on themselves. It's like, when you're 18, you're an adult, move out. Start doing your own thing. Take care of yourself, right? That would be individualistic. Collectivist cultures are often accredited towards Africa, Asia, and also Latin America. Individuals' major function is focused on the welfare of the group for their collective survival. So they work together as a team, basically a family unit or a community unit. Strive to build group solidarity. Emphasis is placed on being identified with one social group. Needs of the group take precedence over self-interest. So what is good for the family is better than good for just one person. There's sharing, cooperation, and then also social responsibility to contribute to the community. A person may conceptualize a career choice from the perception of what is best for the family group rather than from a personal perspective. And family is more important than the individual. And you'll see that if you are a minority that comes from a collectivist culture, and if you are someone who is Americanized, let's say, it is a painful struggle sometimes to understand where you fit in this world. Acculturation is the extent to which a client has assumed the beliefs, values, and behaviors of the dominant white society, because we're talking about America. Some live biculturally or multiculturally. So some people actually, let's say if you are Chinese American, right? Right there, you might be speaking Chinese at home and American or English at school and at work. Or you could be someone who only speaks Chinese and really don't communicate with the, let's say, Caucasian society or the dominant society at all. You live in a neighborhood that is predominantly Chinese as well. You go and eat and talk in Chinese. You eat Chinese food only and stuff like that. Or you could be someone who goes, I'm American, and rejects everything that is Chinese and accepts everything that's from the dominant culture. So it really does depend on that person, right? Many experiences conflicts, again, that struggle to identify who they are, to find out who they are as a person, and especially between generations, between parents and their children, they will see a significant change. Time orientation from the dominant society can present barriers to effective career planning. And this is a little controversial, but what they're saying is that in collectivist cultures, people are not obsessed with being on time and maintaining a strict commitment. So you guys might laugh. Some of you guys are, oh, I recognize that. And that's can be true for some people, but it's not necessarily true for everyone. Okay, so I'll give you a personal example. My mom does not care what time you are supposed to meet someone. She will meet you when she feels like it. And it can be very uncomfortable. And I'll give you an example. We were supposed to go to a wedding, and my mom was like, I want to watch my Chinese drama right now. When we're done, we'll go over to the wedding. And by the time she was finished watching her Chinese drama, that episode, we got to the wedding, and the wedding was done. We just went to the reception, which was fine as well. But we missed the entire wedding ceremony, which can be seen as disrespectful from the bride and groom's point of view, right? Human nature is basically good, and that human beings can be trusted to have positive motives is shared by Asian, Native, and Latinx American cultures. This has subjected these groups to being judged by the dominant society as naive and gullible in the workplace, and then told to kind of like wise up to reality. Okay, so again, you can see how the dominant culture might go, well, because you do this, you might be lazy or whatever, when really it isn't. It's actually just a cultural difference. Personal space and privacy. People from different cultures tend to invade each other's personal space differently without being aware of it. You might be walking into it, staring into it, smell by wearing a strong perfume. Those are different ways that people do that. An example would be eye contact. North American and Arabic cultures expect others to look at them in the eye when talking, whereas Asian people will see staring at someone in the eyes as insulting and maybe even intimidating or challenging, like almost like a threatening stance. Example, another one is talking. Latinx stand closer to each other than for European Americans. Arabs expect to stand very close to each other, and it tends to be more gendered as well if you think about that. But yeah, so sometimes, people jokingly say, are those two people, let's say, Arabic or European, or are they like partners, significant others? Because sometimes they're so close, an American person who's staring at them or watching them might go, what is that? Is that a couple, or is that actually just the culture? And that's something that you want to also pay attention to as well. And of course, I'm not trying to demean any culture or anything like that, or making fun of any cultures with that example. Cultural differences in work-related activities, Hofstede. said that in the 1980s, there was a study 50 different countries and 20 different languages and 7 different occupational levels determined dimensions of cultural differences at work-related values. So basically, they did a gigantic study to see what the differences and commonalities there are. And if you want to read the full description, which you should, it's on page 226. In it, they talk about power distance, which is the relationship between the boss and the workers or subordinates. Uncertainty avoidance, how different cultures and societies deal with anxiety and stress. Some might take it out physically by working, exercising, working out, and stuff like that, while others may take it internally. Individualism versus collectivism, which we've already discussed, which cultures foster individual tendencies rather than group or collectivist tendencies. And then, of course, masculinity is also very important when it comes to work, if you think about that, right? Which cultures would maintain and foster differences between sexes in the workplace? All that stuff will be discussed if you read the description of the study. Cultural differences in negotiations. U.S. negotiators approach others with a firm commitment to establish assumptions that are rooted in American culture and values, which are like pragmatism. What does pragmatism mean? It means dealing with things sensibly and realistically in a way that is based on practical rather than theoretical considerations. So you can be very logical. Okay, they value independence and competition. Capitalist societies like America. Get the best deals as quickly as possible, and Americans focus on getting the job done quickly with little attention paid to social activities or building relationships. Other cultures place a great deal of emphasis on the role of socializing as a most important part of the negotiation process. And you'll see that with some cultures. You'll see the president playing golf, maybe, or have dinner with certain cultures, or spend time, hanging out together to get to know each other because they realize that the socialization part is really important, not just the business and then, get in, get out, and that's it, which is very American. The challenge of becoming culturally competent. In the last 30 years, studies say that there is a need for counselors to be culturally competent. Again, detailed explanation in the ACA Appendix 1. Number 1 is understanding one's assumptions, values, and biases. Number 2 is understanding the worldview of the culturally different client. And 3 is developing appropriate intervention strategies and techniques. So those are things that are important to think about when you are trying to get yourself to be culturally competent. Cross, Bazan, Dennis, and Isaac in 1989, has 5 skills areas that overlap, the 9 by Sue and colleagues in 1992. Number 1 is awareness and acceptance of differences. 2 is self-awareness. 3 is dynamic of differences. 4 is knowledge of the client's culture, and 5 is adaptation of skills. So we're actually going to go through and define each of these in the next couple of slides, okay? So awareness and acceptance of differences. You have to recognize the individuals and unique differences with every client. Counselors are more aware of cultural differences that exist in the worldview and work-related activities, so you do not want to impose their values on other people, okay? Self-awareness is recognize any prejudice that would make it difficult to empathize with a person of color. Use their own lives as a backdrop for appreciating how and why others may be different. So to understand that person and be aware of your own personal biases and your ideas of what this group might be like, and really learn about that person individually, okay? But you have to be aware of that about yourself. Dynamics of difference is related to the self-awareness, knowledge of subtle differences between cultures in a way that interact and communicate. So eye contact, counselors can communicate an awareness of differences between cultures by adopting appropriate cultural counseling techniques. So maybe with an Asian person, you're not going to stare at their eyes the entire time because that might not necessarily be very comfortable for that client, okay? So you're going to start to not necessarily become that culture, but understand and respect how that person is working when it comes to a cultural point of view. Knowledge of the client's culture, preparing for the counseling by familiarizing themselves with the client's cultural orientation. So maybe you find out that you have someone who has a very specific culture, like let's say Indonesian, and maybe they're Muslim. Okay, so you have to understand the culture, country of origin, the socio-political context, like are things going on, maybe that's a reason why they have come to America is because of a war or something, or political differences, being LGBT, QIA, or whatever it is, religion, family roles, and gender roles. Also, cultural assumptions of appropriate behavior, cultural values and ideologies. So you should be aware of these things so that you don't misinterpret their actions and behaviors. Class definition, if any, powers and relationship, work roles, customs, and then, of course, traditions. Adaptation of skills. Process of altering counseling programs and intervention strategies to fit the client's cultural values better. So this is why when we have people who are minorities becoming counselors, it's actually really helpful because they already understand the head culture, right? So they understand how to change, let's say, or adjust or adapt, the key word here, westernized thought and counseling into a little bit more appropriate for their own culture, right? Counselors need to evaluate the counseling process carefully from the perspective of how methods, procedures, and materials can be adapted to make certain they are culturally appropriate. There are two things when it comes to this. One is called ethics. There are universal truths across cultures. Judge behavior on what a counselor considers to be universal standards of behavior. So there are certain things like, be kind to each other. That would be something that almost every country, the philosophy would be similar, right? Do no harm. Those are things that you would want to agree upon. EMICs are truths culture specific. There are behavior norms within each culture. So maybe it's a standard of beauty. Everyone in different cultures will have a different perspective on what is pretty. Some might think that small eyes is pretty. Some cultures might think big eyes is pretty, right? So again, that's just a superficial example, but that is also something that can be interpreted differently within the cultures. Ethnocentrism, when counselors insist on using their own background of biases, values, and beliefs to interpret culturally different actions and behaviors, they're suggesting that their race is superior. And we're not necessarily saying this is a Caucasian perspective. Maybe, let's say an Asian perspective, a lot of motivation comes from education. So if you have an Asian therapist or counselor or police officer, probation officer, and they have a client that doesn't necessarily value education as much, you can't judge them and say, oh, they're being inferior, they're stupid, or lazy, or anything like that. You have to realize that in that culture, maybe, or the way they were raised, education was not important because of specific reasons. Maybe it's poverty, whatever it is. And that's just an example. I don't want to make it so that it sounds as though everything is from a Caucasian, perspective that's negative. I want to let you know that it also exists in all different cultures as well. Cultural identity. Personal identity makes one unique and has been a key issue in the career choice process for all clients. Collective identities are members of social groups, networks, for example, religious, cultural, occupation, and relational identities are group affiliations and interactions. And of course, identity is fluid, which basically means that identity changes over time as a person develops and experiences more things in life. There are 5 major cultural groups, so this is kind of like the second part of this chapter. The government, agencies, groups, individual by culture for various reasons. And so this one, for now, this is what it is. African American or Black, Asian, Southeast Asian, Asian Indian, or other Asian is the second group. Third group is Hispanic or Latinx. 4 is Native Americans, First Nation people. And 5 is white, Anglo-Saxon or European American or Caucasian. So we're going to break down these different groups. And again, I want to make sure that I preface this just like the book has said before. Do not want to say that this is encompassing of everyone in this culture. Okay, these are just commonalities that people have observed. And I know it can be very frustrating if you're in that group and you're like, I don't identify with this at all. Again, there are people who are not going to be exactly like what this says or even remotely like this, okay? So again, I want to keep you that in mind because it is very difficult to teach about multiculturalism unless we have some things that are discussed. And it's good for us to argue and say, I don't agree or I agree, okay? African Americans. Second largest minority group is African Americans, wage earners rather than self-employed. Half of this group owns their own homes. Significant number are business executives, managers, and professionals. African American men have achieved greater career mobility than African American women, which is basically saying that men have moved up in the ranks faster, quickly, or more quick than African American women. 3 generations of family on welfare do not change their status, so no job skills and are resistant. So again, if 3 generations are on welfare, they're saying is that um, most often the other generations will not get out of that and continue that. Again, that sounds awful when I read it first, but they're just saying these are some of the statistics. But again, can you change that? Of course. Can people in that group change? Definitely, and we hope that they do. 7 counseling procedures by Paniagua in 2005. Number 1, discuss racial differences. How does a client feel working with someone who is white or another ethnicity? Convincing the client of the counselor's sensitivity, racism, and oppression by asking that question. Okay, you are bringing it up to your client, your African American client, and saying that I recognize that there's a difference. How do you feel about working together? Number 2 is assess the client's level of acculturation. 3, avoid offering casual explanations of problems. Avoid linking mental health problems to members of the family. 4, include the client's church in the counseling process if they bring up church. If they don't, of course, you're not going to insist that. 5, recognize and define the roles of those who can accompany the client. Involving family in interventions can be very effective. So again, if they're collectivists, that actually might be very helpful. 6, emphasize strengths rather than deficits. And 7, avoid giving the impression that you as a counselor are a protector of the race. So you don't want to have this thing, what is known as a savior complex, which is let me come in, rescue you, and then leave. Because that means that they are like some kind of like subhuman or sub-level of you. People are people. We should all be treated equally. Okay? Okay, now let's talk a little bit about Asians and Pacific Americans. So there are 4 types of Asians that are identified in this book. Number 1 is Asian Americans. Number 2 is Southeast Asians. 3 is Asian Indian. And 4 is Other Asian. There are vast differences in ethnicity, language, religion, and cultural values. So unlike, let's say, Latin America and also Mexico and Central America as well, most of them speak Spanish, right? Uh, but they're all different countries. Uh, Whereas in Asia, they don't speak the same language in all those different countries. So again, it's a very different type. Each group has distinct histories, differences in educational achievement, occupation, wage earners, or wages earned, and of course the standard of living is going to be different as well. The model minority group is a phrase that you might have heard when describing Asians. Some Asians have excelled in educational achievement, earn high wages, and are employed in prestigious jobs and professions. But there are also Asian Americans who are undereducated, receive public assistance, live in a crowded urban area, are unemployed, and are involved in juvenile delinquency. So we don't want people to think, when you think of Asian, to automatically think smart, math, successful doctor, engineer, lawyer. Okay? Because there are different types of Asians. There are also Asians who don't like math, don't want to be doctors, and all that other stuff as well. Okay? And that's really important to think about because let's say that there goes a grant and an Asian group wants to fund it or wants the grant to be funded for them. And maybe they actually are a percentage of the more socioeconomic poverty levels. But the thing is, because they say they're Asian, people might go, oh, Asian people are always really smart and successful, so they don't really need these services. And that does a disservice and keeps the people who are in poverty still. Okay? Many Asian American groups place high value on education as a means of upward mobility and are highly motivated to remove barriers that could limit them. Hindered by the job market because of poor communication skills. Brammer and Ponterado said this, which is that Chinese American students inhibit emotional expression and do not actively participate in counseling process. So right there, you might want to think about that, or consider that, so that if you do have a Chinese American student who does not necessarily talk about their emotions or not willing to participate in counseling, that you're not saying that they're evil, bad, disruptive, and troublesome or problematic, but to understand that that might be their cultural upbringing. Chinese Americans are discouraged from revealing emotional problems by their cultural conditioning. And as an example would be like, if you have problems, you keep it to yourself. You don't worry about other people or give people, you don't bother other people with what your own concerns are. You should be able to handle it all. And of course, that's not true. Asian people, just like everyone else, have problems and should be able to talk to people about it as well without shame or anything like that. Chinese American students react more favorably to well-structured counseling models, which means that they like direction. Okay, and you need to also, again, make sure that that person you're talking to is also like that, because there are going to be some Asian Americans that will not necessarily like that. Peterson and colleagues, Ridley and Sue, says that Asian Americans are very sensitive about verbalizing psychological problems, especially in group encounters. So again, it comes with before is about privacy, keep everything to yourself, don't share, don't bring shame to a person's family. Tend to be inexpressive when asked to discuss personal achievements and limitations. Tend to misinterpret the role of counseling in general and the benefits that may be derived from it. So they may not understand how beneficial talking out these problems are. Okay, can be perceived as very passive and non-assertive with authority figures, but in reality, they are reacting to cultural inhibitions that discourage them from being perceived as aggressive. So in some Asian cultures, you don't talk to unless you don't talk out loud unless you're being someone's talking to you first, right? Or an elderly person respect does. So that's another reason why they might not talk or might verbalize anything. May strongly resist suggestions to modify behavior that is unassuming or non-assertive. So maybe part of the culture is to not be assertive, right? So if that is, you're telling them to be assertive, they're going to go, why are you making me not be like my culture that I want to, I value? Okay. So again, that is something that you want to also consider. Strong work ethic, industrious workers, value education, taking advantage of higher education to enhance their career development. Well in business administration, engineering and sciences, obviously because if there's a language discrepancy between English and whatever Asian language, mathematics is actually a universal language, which is why maybe that's why they're doing really well in sciences. Okay. Most recent immigrants from Asia are employed in service occupations such as office and clerical jobs and service workers. When discussing personal issues, more appropriate to be indirect, and counselors should do most of the initial verbalization with a rather formal interactive approach. So what that is saying is when you first work with a person who might come from an Asian perspective or Asian culture is to be a little bit more formal and stuff before you become informal. Okay. Many Asians rely on natural healing process, which is kind of like, herbal things or maybe ignore it or do other types of things, not necessarily take medication to heal or therapy to heal. Do not recognize or acknowledge that there is a mental health problem. That's something that's also really interesting. Some Asian cultures actually don't believe that there is such thing as psychological issues. It might be a curse, it might be a hex, it might be some sort of magic that's actually causing a person to be mentally challenge, let's say, or have a cognitive challenge. It might be a curse from God or something like that as well. Are afraid of being stigmatized if they seek help. Do not want to address negative comments about their traditional healing practices. Do not have access to bilingual bicultural services, and assume the provider will not be culturally competent. So the attitude might be, let's not go there because they don't understand us anyways, and of course that prevents a person from getting help. Hispanic or Latinx Americans, largest minority in the U.S. Largest subgroup is of Mexican ancestry, obviously because Mexico is our neighbors to the south. Uh, Largest subgroup of Mexican ancestry, some prefer to be called Hispanic, some prefer to be called Mexican American, and then there's others who prefer to be called like Puerto Rican American or Cuban American. Influences career perspectives and attitude towards work through social class membership. So depending on your level of financial stability, you might have very specific ideas of what kind of work you should achieve. Environment of the home and the school will also influence them, and also their community. Mexican American families are closely knit groups that greatly influence the values of its members. Spanish speaking children are generally taught to value and respect family, church, and the school, as well as masculinity and honor. It's considered patriarchal, which basically means that the men lead the families. Okay, father is the breadwinner, and the mother is the homemaker, or the mother, taking care of the children. Fawad in 1997 says that you want to consider the cultural context of all clients, be flexible in the career counseling process, especially when we incorporate familial and environmental factors into decision making. So that means considering the family and then, of course, the culture and the environment around us. Choose assessment instruments with care relative to what is appropriate for Latinx cultures. Use immediate interventions to retain Latinx students in school. Career information should include reasons for taking math and science courses. So we'll explain why maybe those things are considered important to Latinx population if they don't necessarily find any value in that or see any value in that. Develop strategies to include self-efficacy as a key to future career successes. Sometimes there's a sense of hopelessness, and so you would want to say, no, you can do it. Believe in yourself. And that encouragement will help with certain people because the statistics say that there are an amount of Latinx people who kind of don't pursue education. Provide Latinx females with a wide variety of career information, including non-traditional careers, because they might be told that they have to be mothers and stay at home, and they should be able to be exposed to all these different types of careers before they choose that, if they choose to do so. And it's nothing wrong if they choose to become a mother and a house homekeeper, basically. Okay. Zunker in 2003 says that response to cultural preferences of clients rather than imposing your own include natural support networks. So find out who supports them, who are their friends, who are the people that they talk to when they need help. Address stress-related immigration issues, because again, that is something that we hear about, dreamers, undocumented people, and that can be very stressful for some family members. Attend to survival issues and personal needs of clients and client families. Use techniques to assist clients making adaptations to new and different living conditions. Utilize client religion to belief systems and strategy planning. And use narrative therapy, metaphor, and family system approaches to talk about the family and act as an advocate for the client needs. Again, these are all things that you can use for almost any cultures, but they're talking specifically about Latin culture here. Native Americans. There are 500 distinct Native American nations that differ significantly in language, religious beliefs, and social characteristics. Keeping close contact with families and friends who live on reservation is a high priority. There are large non-reservation living people living in Los Angeles, in San Francisco, Chicago, Minneapolis, Denver, Tulsa, Phoenix, and Milwaukee. States with the highest Native American populations are Oklahoma, California, Arizona, New Mexico, Alaska, Washington, North Carolina, Texas, New York, and Michigan. So these are just some statistics so that you know where those populations are if you're interested in working with them. On reservations, people work in farming, ranching, fishing, and lumber production. Off reservations, people work in factories, farms, skilled craftspersons. Motel management and gambling industries are emerging, and you hear about those casinos and stuff like that. And there are special rules, which is why Native Americans are allowed to do that, law-wise. Leframboise, Tremblay, and Mohat in 1990 says that traditionally speak only native language and observe traditions. There's also transitional people who speak both native language and English and may question traditions of the past. There's marginal, speak of themselves as Indian, but identify with roles in dominant society. Assimilated means have generally embraced the dominant society, and bicultural, which means that they're accepted by dominant society, but also identify as tribal traditions and culture. So they're saying that there is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 ways that people who are Native American can identify. A strong desire to retain the symbolic aspects of their heritage. An example would be the ability to enjoy the present should be combined with planning skills. ability to share with others, and assertive behaviors, and interpersonal harmony is one of the utmost importance for them to find balance in nature and themselves as well. Native Americans are the most neglected group in the mental health field. Again, let me repeat that because that's actually quite important. Native Americans are the most neglected group in the mental health field. Um, we can just read books about our history, and we should be quite embarrassed actually about how Native Americans were treated when colonization worked or happened. Okay. White Caucasians, Western and Eastern Europeans, Arabic, Jewish, South American, and then also Australian. And I know it sounds a little weird. Why is South American part of here? But actually, there are people who identify as white Caucasian in those countries because of migration and colonization. Colonialization? Sorry, the word. Counselors whose cultural origin is collectivism is encouraged to recognize the significance of a client's cultural orientation of individualism. Okay, so that's the other way around. Valuing autonomy and independence. Again, this is about Caucasians. Searching for opportunities to achieve, consume with the desire to be productive, strongly desires individual responsibility, reinforcing one's self-esteem and self-actualization, which is basically trying to reach this high goal for yourself. The American dream is to choose an optimal career based on one's self-interest and future aspirations. Minority counselors with European Americans obtain the following usually during intake, which is understand their cultural identification, identity development, understand that, socioeconomic influences, potential stereotypes of others, and strengths the client associate with their race. And again, remember, not all Caucasian people are rich or whatever. So again, you need to really understand each person and as an individual. Structure the relationship in order for the client to be proactive. Determine the direction counseling is to take. Well-structured counseling approach would be business-like. Organization of materials and solution-based counseling approach would be good with them. Communication skills, direct, explicit, verbal communication. Clients expect the counselor to be very attentive to their personal needs. Acknowledgement and empathy of one's concerns are most desirable. Punctuality is a sign of respect in Caucasian society. Time is of the essence for most European Americans. Credentials of the counselor can be most significant. One who enjoys personal achievement is more comfortable with another person who demonstrates these traits. So they might want to know what kind of degrees you have because they say, oh, that's something that you achieve individually, right? So they might see that as a plus. Action-oriented, strong need to take control of self and solve problems. They like homework assignments. Periodic reinforcements of individual progress by the counselor can enhance a counseling relationship. So things like, you did it, you did this on your own, you're able to do this, that's great. That kind of motivator can be very beneficial for a person in this population. Stress the strength of the individual, feeling that an individual is able to overcome most obstacles through hard work and dedication. Bolster their self-efficacy or their ability to do things through a series of successes. Some mental health issues of cultural groups. These are some of the disorders that we've already talked about, but I wanted to make sure that you are aware of it because it might be a little different when it comes to a person of color or a multicultural perspective, okay? Anxiety disorders, depression, which is a mood disorder, personality disorders, somatoform disorders, which remember was when you believe that you have something when you really don't. Hypochondria is part of this. And then there's also schizophrenia. The United States sees schizophrenia as an internal problem, so it's something that comes from within. Other countries might see the cause of psychotic symptoms as thought to be external to the person. So maybe it's a curse that someone put on them and they need to get out of that curse somehow, right? So that might be the attitude for some people. Causation is thought to be from external forces that can be overcome, and there's less criticism and hostility directed to the person who is ill. So you don't blame that person for their behavior, saying that, someone put a curse on them or they caught something and then now we just need to figure out a way to get it out of that person. Strategies for dealing with multicultural influences. Now we're going to revisit the 5 different groups and then maybe do some gender breakdowns and then also try to understand it a little bit more. Again, um, you are not going to agree with everything if you're part of each of these things because, it's just saying generalizations here. Working with African American women. African American women have a long history of menial labor as cooks, housemaids, nannies, and other low pay scale jobs. Increasing numbers of women have been successful in owning their own businesses. And when we talk about owning your own businesses, often it's because of discrimination where people don't get hired. So they're going to go, you know what? Instead of dealing with all this discrimination and racism, I'm just going to open up my own business and maybe work within my own community. And this is why we have more and more women who are African American owning their own businesses. There are public sector that shows growth, but private sector continues to discriminate against African American women. Female friendship is a strong support system for African American women. They see themselves as sisters through sororities or church women's groups or social clubs. Spiritual commitment that is used to counteract the unfairness and hardships of oppression and racism. So they use their spirituality to understand and cope with oppression and racism. Health problems associated with poverty and isolation is a huge factor. It's very common, but not necessarily just for African American women, but it is high there too. Teenage pregnancy among African American women is declining, but still an issue. Job training and childcare are 2 primary needs of many African American women. So without job training, a person cannot necessarily get the jobs that they should get, right? And also with childcare, they need babysitters and stuff so that they can go to work. Working with African American men, here in this population value respect, kindness, and decency, and they don't necessarily receive the same back from a white dominant society. Maybe the white dominant society sees them as, unprofessional or whatever like that. And that is the imbalance right there. Address the oppressions associated with racism and white supremacy directly with clients. So we want to talk about that openly, about race and how they feel. Help the men develop self-awareness or self-knowledge. Help men develop a self-identity that allows them to express themselves openly and freely, especially their Africanness. We don't want to say to a person who's African American, you need to be more Caucasian. Okay, or you need to be more of any other culture. They should be able to be themselves, and that's fine. Okay, self-concept development, develop more internally directed behavior, become more aware of job opportunities, clarifying motivational aspirations. So what is the reason why they're getting their job? I want to talk about that and let them value themselves. Dealing with the ambivalence towards people who are white, which is basically understanding and working with them, but also understanding that there's also an attitude that comes from some people who are of the dominant culture that might be seen as unfair. Working with Asian women received the least amount of research. So of all the different types of ethnicities and genders, Asian women, no one cares about them. No, I'm just kidding. There's not that much research though. So that means that if you're interested, you should maybe try and work with this in research if you're interested in doing research. Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia, strong devotion to their children and to the family continuity, strive to avoid actions that would bring shame to the family, and they strongly embrace self-control. So right there you see they're very restricting in their behaviors, and you want to pay attention, be aware of that. Women have a difficult time witnessing current breakdowns in the family honor as their children adopt more of the values and lifestyle of the dominant culture. So what that is saying is that their coping skills are not necessarily the greatest when they see that their children are becoming more Americanized. They might internalize all those stressors in them, and then that's not good for them. Okay, but that's how they're raised to keep everything inside. But they also see that, their children might be losing some of that Asianness that they might value quite a bit. Pervasive problem is the growing trend of children to disobey family rules because, again, the acculturation, they might want to do certain things that all their friends are doing, and then that can cause a lot of conflict within Asian families. Serious conflicts about their future work and life roles. If you know any Asians, usually there's a lot of stress on becoming very successful, and not everyone becomes successful. So there's a lot of stress that is internalized. and you got to see sometimes there's violence and suicide and stuff like that that is associated with all these stressors that come along with being Asian American. Working with Asian men. Asian American men consider family honor more important than personal goals because, again, of the collectivist. And of course, men are always seen as the dominant of the two genders. Decisions are based on what is best for the family. Expect a hierarchical relationship with counselors. So they might see achievement as really respectable and stuff like that. So you don't want to say, you're educated, you're better than me, or I'm better than you because I'm more educated. Again, there might be a hierarchy there. Expect a professional relationship rather than an egalitarian one. So they want to maintain that professionalism, not necessarily being informal. And you might want to pay attention to that when working with Asian American men. Working with Hispanic women, most Latinx women share the common Catholic religion, learn from the religion that women are mothers and wives, primary caretaker, and center their lives around the family needs. And career is not a very meaningful term for many who oversee several children. So they have all these children to take care of. They're going to go, why am I going to work? No, my man or my husband or whatever is actually going to provide for me. And that is the cultural acceptance that has been passed along in Latinx families. Health needs for women are taken care by home remedies and other women in the family. There's a curandismo, which is Mexican folk healer. I have a friend who every time, and she's Mexican American, whenever there's something wrong with her, she boils an egg and then like puts it on her face or something like that and goes, "It will go away now." So again, there's superstition and stuff like that, home remedies and stuff like that that are supposed to cure things, right? And that's something that's very popular. Some strongly support indigenous healing systems and should be recognized along with the current medical practices. So just because they say that, and you don't believe that this is going to happen, or let's say cure something, like let's say a boiled egg or whatever, then, but you should respect what they're saying, but then also talk about medical issues that might be more westernized as well, or understand that there might be people who do a little bit of both when it comes to medical treatments and stuff like that. Most have few skills, little education, and work as maids, factory workers, or in non-skilled jobs. Major goal is to send earnings back to their country of origin to support their families. Short-term goals is to find a place to live and a job, basically. And then long-term goals are becoming legal citizens and bringing their children and families to join them. Again, these are just some common ones that you probably have heard of, but doesn't mean that everyone is like that. So don't, when you meet a person who's Latinx, go, "Are you a citizen?" or anything like that, because that's for some people, obviously not all. Working with Hispanic men, there is this term called machismo, which I'm sure you've all heard of. Arrogance and sexual aggression in Latinx relationships. Motherhood is influencing the equalizing of the sexes. So again, machismo means that the men tend to have more control. Okay, counselors should learn about effective communication skills when it comes to Hispanic men. Work environments and organizations, use of career information, job search strategies, teach them how to use it. Interpersonal relationships is basically communication skills, goal setting and problem solving skills, developing work parent skills, and improving financial management resources. Working with Native American women, role of women vary from tribe to tribe. Traditional primary role is the care of the family. Single women with children are the most impoverished families in the country. Let me repeat that one again because these statistics are very, very important. Single women with children are the most impoverished families in the country, and we're talking about Native American women, okay? Working with Native American men, stereotype as drunkards who sit around the reservation and do little work. There is high levels of alcoholism and addiction within the Native American community. Part of that is because of the way that government has treated Native Americans. So don't say that this is just because they want to get drunk or they want to do drugs. There's actually a very long history of abuse when it comes to Native Americans. So it's up to you when we're trying to encourage you to investigate the historical relationship between the U.S. government and Native Americans to understand the full extent of their losses individually as well as collectively. Okay, so that's really, really important to go into the histories.